This week's episode of our show is sponsored by the Grim Hollow Valakan Clans Kickstarter, which is bringing two awesome new sourcebooks for 5th edition.
This Kickstarter is launching on February 15th with two massive books for you to explore the worlds of Grim Hollow. First off, we have The Raider's Guide to Valaka. This book is going to be a setting guide to the world of Valaka with tons of player options available in it.
Not only are there more transformations, the amazing system that was introduced in the Grim Hollow campaign setting, allowing your player characters to transform into new monsters and creatures, but there are also new martial maneuvers and new rules for large-scale combat encounters involving massive raids.
We also have the Saga of Seasons, which is a campaign for levels 3 to 11, which spans the length of an entire year, where you get to muster your own clan and survive all 4 seasons in the world of Valaka.
This project is brought to you by some of our favorite minds and creators at Ghostfire Gaming, and is sure to be an awesome expansion to the already amazing Grim Hollow campaign setting. So follow the links in the description below to check out the Kickstarter, which is going to be running through late February and into March.
And now, onto this week's episode.
Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we cover everything TTRPGs, including advice for players and guides for DMs.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to this channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Today, we're playing dirty and diving into all the ways that players can cheat when they're playing Dungeons & Dragons or other TTRPGs.
Unfortunately, both of us have experienced some of these at our own tables, and there's many reasons why a player might feel the need to cheat. Perhaps they've been having a string of bad luck and really want to turn the tides in their favor. Perhaps they think that there's a way to win Dungeons & Dragons by performing better at the game. But really, at the end of the day, the 4 things that we're going to be talking about today are things that you should avoid as a player and not do at your game tables. And if you're a DM and you catch a player doing one of these, it might be time for a very valuable conversation on why cheating in Dungeons & Dragons just ruins the fun for everybody.
Players might cheat in TTRPGs for a wide variety of reasons. Some might just hate to lose, or not like the idea of their character failing, or not being the center of attention or a superhero. Sometimes I've seen cheating players have more malicious intent behind it. Unfortunately, this has been more common when I've run games at conventions and in Adventurers League games, where there's more DMs and players in a wider sort of community. And that can bring a lot of toxic behavior into the community as a whole. But I've seen just as much cheating happening from friends that I thought I could trust and that I thought were pretty chill people, but were still cheating in our games of D&D. And in many cases, they thought it was no harm, no foul. They just didn't care that it was happening. And my response to that is, if you don't think that it matters, then why are you cheating?
We did a separate video on how DMs can cheat, which you can check out right up over there. And in that video, we talked about when the cheating crosses the line, but also how cheating on a DM side can actually be used to benefit the narrative of the game. However, when it comes to players, most of the time, if you are cheating, it's self-serving and it's taking away from the other people participating in the game. This is the big difference between players and DMs. DMs, if they're cheating for the benefit of the players and the narrative, can sometimes be beneficial. Again, there's a lot more context to it than that, which you can see in our video. But players, on the other hand, when you cheat, it's often not for the sake of the narrative or the rest of the players at the table. It's for the sake of your own character.
Most unfortunately, when players cheat, it's a symptom of a larger social problem that might be existing at the game table between the group. Oftentimes, a player who is cheating, that might not be the only disruptive thing that they might be doing during the game. They might be power gaming, they might be hogging the spotlight, they might be bossing the other players around, or they might be doing other things that contribute to a negative game experience. So sometimes cheating and catching cheating can be one of those early warning signs that, if caught early, you might be able to repair things before it gets worse. So let's take a look at some of the ways that players do commonly cheat, some of the things that actually happen, because there are some really subtle things here. And I've been amazed at how long some of these have flown under my radar.
As a final disclaimer, I want to say that if you're close friends with somebody and you're playing at the game table and you do catch them cheating, you don't have to kick them out of your game. You don't have to assume that they're a malicious or evil person who is doing this to ruin your games of D&D. Sometimes just a simple conversation or just acknowledging to them that you caught them is enough to stop that behavior, and you can continue on playing D&D from there. Unfortunately, after that though, if it continues and it keeps coming up, that shows a lack of respect for the table, the DM, and everybody at it.
So obviously, tabletop role-playing games involve a lot of chance and a lot of dice and a lot of RNG. And so as a result of that, there are as many ways to cheat with a dice as there are facets and vertices on the dice, probably more actually. And fixing the dice is, I would say, the most common that I've encountered, but also the most varied. There are so many different ways that these little objects can be manipulated, even in plain sight.
It doesn't matter if everybody has view of the dice. It doesn't matter if the DM can see the dice rolls as they're happening. This is harder if you are playing digitally with electronic dice. Then you can't actually fix the dice, and there are benefits there. But a lot of people like rolling dice, and that's where a lot of these variables can come into play. First of all, there are people out there who make trick dice and loaded dice, and don't use those at your table. Out of all the ways to cheat, that one feels the dirtiest to me.
I know, and there are really subtle ones. There are D20s out there that the only difference between them and a normal dice is the one is just another 20. I've also seen just D20s that they look normal when you first pass about them, but then you realize that they only have like 7, 8, and 6, and there is a 1, but there isn't a 2, a 3, or a 3, or a 4. Or like, I've also seen D20s where there won't be any number under 10 on them. And if you aren't looking for it and you don't think about it, you just won't even notice it. It doesn't even have to be a loaded die. It's just a die without an even spread of numbers on it.
I have a D20 at home that has 20 on every side. I feel like that's a little obvious.
Yeah.
I don't think I can roll that one out in the open. But for the most part, if you're buying trick dice or loaded dice, then those can be fun novelty items, but don't use them in a game.
Use those. But I've seen people do it. Like, I played with people who I was like, and then realizing that was the die they were using for weeks. But the thing is that you don't need to use trick dice or loaded dice to manipulate these dice, and you don't even need to roll them behind a screen. One of the most basic things that I've caught people doing is relying on the fact that there's a lot of fancy dice out there. And there's a lot of fancy dice that are in fancy colors with fancy weird fonts that me as the dungeon master, if I'm sitting over here and the player's at the other end of the table, I actually can't see what's on their dice. And in some cases, neither can the player beside them. I played with someone who had really tiny dice. It was a cute set of like really tiny dice, but nobody would, unless you were sitting like right in front of the dice, you couldn't actually see what was on them. And so they just lied. They just lied about what they rolled.
There is a great way that you can actually hide your lie as well, and that's by just picking up the dice quickly, the quick pickup.
Yeah, I've seen people that they'll roll the die, and they'll be like, oh, I got a 16. And really they got a 6, and they just turned it as they were picking it up. Or like examining it in some way, and no one else could have seen it but them.
It's the roll, the immediate pickup, and
Yeah.
as you're picking it up, you can actually, if you're acknowledging as you're picking it up that you don't like the number, you can thumb it over to a different number and just read the number that you wanted.
And like, whenever I see someone do that, I'm like, I know you didn't roll that. Like, but it's weird because like I played with someone who like they would roll the dice and they would pick the die up as if to like show me what they'd rolled, as if as if somehow, like, in the intervening time, and literally they were turning the die to a better number as they were showing it to me. And like,
Now, I will say my problem is, for those of you who watch our live stream, one of my characters, I wear an eye patch to play the character, and I actually have a hard time reading my dice. So I do sometimes pick up my dice to see it more clearly. But don't be a jerk about it. Don't thumb the dice over. If you're picking up your die, I usually, if I'm picking up my die, let Joe, who's on the side of my dice tray, see as well. And he often looks over. And there have been times that I also am bad at math and have been like, 24. And Joe's like, no. And I'm like, 23.
I also used to play with people. This was more common when I was playing like war games like Warhammer, where like they would declare a dice was a cock die, which mean that it had not landed flat, when it really had, and then use that as an excuse to re-roll it or something like that. A really good solution to this that is like a subtle jab at somebody, but it's kind of passive-aggressive, is if you have someone that is a dice cheater, buy them a dice tray and a new set of dice as a gift. and then when they don't use it, or if they don't use it, be really like insulted that they're not using your gift.
What about the dice I buy you? The ones that aren't loaded.
Or buy them like a dice tower, because like you can't, there's so little that you can do with a dice tower or something like that. And so you can just be like, why aren't you using the dice tower I got you?
That rolls into a glass container where you can't touch the dice afterwards. Why aren't you using it?
Yeah.
I don't know.
So there's a lot of ways that you can address it with this. I mean, at the end of the day, even with all this, I have still seen people just out and out lie about what they rolled. And the dice will be sitting there on the 7, and they'll be like, yeah, I rolled a 17.
Beyond the dice, the other element of the game that the characters have complete control over, that the DM may not have immediate access to, is their character sheets. And this is where fraudulent bookkeeping.
Yes. And to dovetail this, the fraudulent bookkeeping can overlap with the dice lying in the respect that sometimes players just lie about what their modifier is and just subtly boost their roll up by a couple points. And so you'll get a player that'll be like, yeah, I rolled a 7, but I have a plus 12. And then when you actually look at their character sheet, it says plus 12. But then when you go through, you're like, how did you get a plus 12 in this? And it turns out that they've just added number. And what's interesting about this whole like style of fraud is the plausible deniability of saying, oh, I'm just bad at math.
I am bad at math. But
are you?
Do we want to get into how bad at math I am?
But are you? Because that's a really good cover story.
No, okay. Here's how bad at math I am. Joe, one time, I was like, I have a plus 8, and I always was counting on my fingers. And Joe was like, Kelly, plus 10 minus 2. And my head exploded with that. I was like, oh, I can do that. Rather than counting on my fingers, I can add 10 minus 2. And that was an epiphany for me that changed D&D dice rolling forever. But when it comes to fraudulent bookkeeping, I will say again, digital formats have helped improve this. There are digital character sheets that do the math for you, and then therefore it's harder. Now you can override that math, but usually if you're using a digital character sheet, your DM can go in and just make sure. I go in and just check my characters' character sheets before every game as a DM, just to make sure I know what spells they have packed, what items they have, try to play into those. But paper character sheets, you can write whatever the heck you want on them.
In pencil, which is something that even digital character sheets are susceptible to, because you can still edit your character sheet, whether it is physical or digital. And I've seen really diverse ways of cheating that had nothing to do about dice rolls and math involving this kind of fraudulent bookkeeping. I have played games with players who would intentionally not take proficiencies in all their skills so that they could always have a floating skill proficiency and just circle what one they were proficient in, or change that. I played with players who they would change what spells their character knew or had prepared. Not like using retraining, but like they'd be in the middle of an encounter and it would be the encounter where web was the perfect spell, but their character actually didn't have it. They would just change their character sheet to have web. And just say that they had it the whole time.
If you want to do something like that, ask your DM. Like when I think when Tasha's came out, and I said, "Can I retrain my spell list?"
Yeah, but the whole thing with this particular player was it wasn't that they were retraining their character. It was that in the combat scenario where that spell was the perfect spell, they just gave themselves that spell despite not having it chosen at all.
Yeah, that's something that you should never be doing. But if you're not happy with the spells, first of all, changing them out in the middle of a combat encounter isn't great.
Yeah.
But if you want to change up your spells, I've had a player who was playing a warlock who liked less than half of the spells they had picked. And they said, "Hey, I'm not liking these. Can I try out some different spells?" And I went, "Yeah, of course. Like I want them to have fun at the table." They were a newer player. How are you going to learn if you're not trying out the spells? So most DMs, I think, are pretty forgiving, especially with a new player who's trying things out for the first time. I let people retrain spells on a level up if they feel like, no matter what class they're playing, if they're not happy with certain spells. I just think that that's more fun for everybody at the table. But don't lie about it. It's just taking away from everybody's enjoyment of the game.
Speaking of other forms of magic and tracking, I played with a person who just never marked down that they used a healing potion. They effectively had infinite healing potions. They never crossed off their consumables. They never marked off that they had actually spent their gold. And I haven't encountered this myself, but players that just wouldn't mark off when spells or abilities were expended, or even players that just would ignore the fact that they'd taken damage and be like, "Oh yeah, I took 20 points of damage. I'm going to turn that to 10 points of damage." And relying on the fact that this is one of those things that ironically, I've seen this behavior from players who are dungeon masters. Because oftentimes, as a dungeon master, you have a lot to track. And you can't necessarily be tracking every spell your player has expended, or every hit point of damage that they've taken, or every item that they have in their inventory, or everything that they have on their character sheet. And players that don't care can just take advantage of that fact, and take advantage of the fact that the dungeon master trusts you as a player to be honest with this stuff. And I think that this is where it gets where this is where the damage is. It's like, as a DM, I trust that my players are going to be tracking their character sheets honestly. I trust that they're going to be doing this. And then that breaks that trust.
Yeah, and I think that this is where we get into players playing by their own rules. And this comes with things like intentionally forgetting rules, intentionally getting the rules wrong. And I want to tell you that in last night's game, I used 2 reactions on a turn, and I am sorry.
And I didn't catch it, right?
Neither did I.
But the thing is, that was a mistake, right? But there is that sort of thing where sometimes you will get players that do that on purpose and hope that... Because I know that you didn't do it on purpose. I missed it. But that was a great example of someone that's aware that that sort of thing can happen, can take advantage of that and make and not do it all the time, but then suddenly do it when it matters and hope that it doesn't get noticed, right? Or and it's weird that this playing by their own rules thing it's a different form of cheating than like being a rules lawyer, because it's almost like what the rules are, you're getting them wrong on purpose, or relying on not like an interpretation of the rules. That that's not the way the rules are supposed to work. That you can't take 2 reactions a turn, but you're just going to try anyway and hope that the DM forgot that you already took a reaction earlier in the turn.
Yeah, and this one's tricky to catch at the table, because in our example that I just said, players also have a lot to keep track of. And it's really hard to tell who's exploiting this concept and who is genuinely making a mistake.
I think another example from our own campaigns is once when you used Thunderstep to teleport out of a room, and Thunderstep relies on line of sight, Dimension Door doesn't. In the moment we forgot but again, sometimes you'll run into players that just are hoping that people will forget and conveniently do it on purpose. It's really hard to find when people are doing this, but it unfortunately does happen.
And I will say that it is really hard as a player to keep track of everything, so don't feel like you're cheating if you make a mistake. But if you are taking advantage of those mistakes, then you're not being a good player.
Yeah, and that's one thing. I think it's interesting to note that we've run into these mistakes, and we're experienced D&D players that, you know, we've been playing for a long time. But it gets really worse when an experienced player takes advantage of the inexperience of a DM. And so I remember playing in it again. Unfortunately, this happens a lot. This has happened a lot in Adventurers League, and I don't want to diminish how awesome Adventurers League is and how awesome like public play is, because I love it. It's just that when you play games in public with people that you don't necessarily know, you tend to encounter the cheating and the bad behavior more often. And so another one that I have seen several times is people who know about the bonus action spellcasting cantrip rule, and they know the way that it works, and would just try to get it past a new DM so they could cast 2 fireballs in a turn. And that's just not cool. I think the other kind of side of this is that it has this weird layer of plausible deniability, because it's fine to make a rules mistake. It's fine to get it wrong.
We all do it.
We all do. We do it all the time. I'm very certain that if you watch all 150 episodes of our live stream campaigns that we've done, you will find rules mistakes in basically every single episode. What we're talking about here is the person who intentionally takes advantage of that fact. And unfortunately, they do exist.
The last one is one that's a little bit of a broader topic, and we've talked about it a lot, and doesn't always need to be considered cheating, and that is metagaming. Now, metagaming is also a tricky one that players can make a simple mistake because they just know the game of D&D really well, and they use that inherent logic and understanding in their game. Whether they're doing it intentionally or not, again, is hard to catch.
If you don't know what metagaming is, broadly speaking, metagaming is considered when a player brings knowledge from outside the game, or that their character... broadly, if you don't know what metagaming is, the very short definition of it is when players bring out-of-character knowledge into the game. The infamous example of this would be characters knowing that trolls have their regeneration stopped by fire, despite their characters having never encountered a troll at all before. Now, I find that this example in particular is actually a terrible example of metagaming, because trolls and vampires are so famous in terms of their mythology that I think that it's almost like you can't... It's impossible to divorce your knowledge of this from these. So there's certain things where like the metagame knowledge is a problem, and there's certain things where we just have to accept the fact that everyone knows that trolls have their regeneration stopped by fire now. But not everybody knows that sloths can cause tadpoles that burrow into your body and turn you into a sloth with their disease. And not everybody knows that, say, for example, a lich has a phylactery. So there can be, or it might be metagaming to even identify, oh, that person is a vampire, even if you're...
This is where it gets into that confusing, blurry area, is even before I played D&D, I could have told you all the ways to kill a vampire. Have I encountered a vampire in my life?
Yeah.
No. But they're in our mythology. And the same way that I imagine... I've heard the argument, when specifically talking about the troll, that if trolls are a known problem in your world, most people have probably heard how to kill a troll. And that's where you have to really talk about what is the mythos in your world? What are the legends that everybody knows? Perhaps every child is told a story about the troll who was burned and then killed, and they're like, that's how you kill a troll. But there needs to be a certain point where the player separates their knowledge of the game. Perhaps they've read the entire monster manual, and they need to still play it like they don't.
I mean, the thing is, and this is where it also gets into tricky ground with players who are also game masters or dungeon masters, and who, like us, might have an encyclopedic knowledge of the rules. I just have game statistics for monsters memorized. I just know what they do. And so for me, when I encounter a monster, oftentimes based on their physical description alone, it's like, I know that's a mind flayer. I know that's a beholder. I know what they do. I know how to fight them. And so it can be challenging to divorce those things, even when you are trying to be in character and not. And that's why, in general, I suggest that if you are playing with experienced players or people who also DM games, it can grease the wheels a little bit if you do a little bit more homebrewing and be a little bit more forgiving of this, and maybe a little bit more fair about it. And I don't think that I can't, in good conscience, consider knowing a monster's game statistics cheating. But if you were fighting a monster and you pulled up their game statistics on a website while you were fighting them and were looking at them, and then when the dungeon master said an 18 misses, and you go, no, but the monster has an AC 17, now you're cheating, because the DM can change the monster stats. They can do whatever they want with it on a whim, and that's completely within their rights. And so if you are going to look up a monster's game statistics, and especially in the middle of combat, and then call out the dungeon master for not obeying the rules of that stat block, or start announcing, hey everybody, this monster has fire resistance, and you're looking at, that's 100% cheating.
I agree with that, and I think that's where we cross the line. We can't really separate our inherent knowledge about the game. If I encounter an intellect devourer, it doesn't matter what character I'm playing, I'm terrified of that thing. and that's just a natural instinct that I'm like, I don't want to make that intelligence saving throw against the intellect devourer. It scares me.
I should use intellect devourers again.
You used them once, and I think my character did have a visceral response to it, even though there's no reason why he would know what it is. But, I mean, if you see a walking brain, why are you not afraid? But if I ever call out Monty being like, no, I hit, and he told me I didn't, no, then we're not on the same side. Monty also does a wonderful job where usually until the end of combat, when I'm killing the monster, only then do I realize what I was fighting. And that comes from descriptions. Take your monster and just don't say you're fighting a troll. Say this lumbering creature comes out. You don't even change the description. Don't make it a green warty hulking creature. Make it something different. Make it eldritch horror, like we do in most of our cases. If you change the description of the monster, your players might have less of a clue as to how to defeat it.
I have also encountered a very extreme form of cheating. And once again, unfortunately, I encountered this in public play in Adventures League, where the player was reading the adventures and the modules. For those that don't know, in D&D Adventures League, the Game Masters have published modules that are Adventures League legal, that are accessible to anyone through the Game Masters Guild, or use the official published adventures. And so I was DMing, I've been DMing Adventures League for many years. I don't anymore, but I have encountered players who it was very obvious that they were reading the module. And again, once again, sometimes people replay Adventures League modules, or they play adventures that they've DM'd. And they're usually very open about it. Like, I've had players be like, hey, I've DM'd this module before, but I'd really like to play it. Is that okay? And I've been like, yes, but you know that there's the puzzle here, so is it okay if you just take a step back and let everyone else solve this for the first time? But I've also encountered people who would play the adventure before, would walk into the room and be like, oh, I am so smart. I know exactly how to solve this puzzle. And it was because they'd read the adventure before, not because they were actually brilliant, but they used that as an excuse to look like they were smart.
I find that this is
gross behavior.
This is the silliest form of cheating, because for me, I love experiencing an adventure. I remember, I still have hopes of one day playing in Curse of Strahd, so I've never actually bought the Curse of Strahd book.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. And there are so many secrets in Curse of Strahd.
I don't know any of them.
Like there are magic items that are hidden in Curse of Strahd that you're not going to find unless you are like stumble into them by mistake. And there's just things that like don't do this kind of cheating. It's very obvious that you've read the module. It's so obvious, like so obvious when people do things like this, and I don't understand why anyone would do it. Like, it's just ruining it for yourself. But I don't know. I don't know what it is. Like,
I guess it's that sense of wanting to win, but there is no winning. Really, it's just a loss. For me, the joy of D&D is experiencing the story, and maybe people have a different opinion there, but I go into an adventure wanting to be surprised. If I'm not surprised, then I'm not having as much fun.
I mean, the thing about this is that I do think that there is a lot of culture that comes over from video games, where I know that there are people who like get the guidebook for the video game, or they read like the game FAQs, or they read the guide articles to help them get through the levels, so they kind of know what's coming. And in a video game, particularly a solo video game, where it's your own experience, that is completely fine. But D&D is played with a group of people. And so when you are reading ahead and cheating and like just downloading the solution to the adventure, that's not fair to everyone else at the table. And that's what it really comes down to with this kind of cheating, is it's not fair to everybody else. You robbed everyone else at the table of the ability to participate in the enjoyment that comes from solving that puzzle and experiencing that themselves. That's why this kind of cheating is so bad, in my opinion.
D&D is a shared narrative experience. So when you're cheating at a video game that you're playing by yourself, then that's up to you. But when you cheat at a D&D table, you're not cheating yourself. You're cheating every other person sitting at that table. And that's just not cool. That's not a cool way to play the game. And if you're a player and you're doing any of these options that we've talked about, yes, some of them can be honest mistakes. And some of them, maybe you have cheated. And I'm not saying that you're a terrible person for cheating. For the most part, you shouldn't be doing this. And if you did do it in the past, but you stopped, good on you. I think when I was an early player, I probably did a couple of these things on the list a few times because I was just getting into the game. I was scared of my character dying. I was worried about losing. I had a win-lose mentality. Now, I've been playing for a few years, and I know that the fun is in the failures. And the game isn't interesting if I'm not rolling a 1 here and there or getting dropped to 0 hit points on occasion. Those are fun for me. And so if you're a new player, just be aware that you don't have to cheat at D&D. The game is more fun when you give in to the experience and let the dice fall as they may. If there are any other ways that players at your table have cheated that you are aware of, or if you've had experiences with the things that we've talked about today, tell us about them in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the work that we do here on YouTube, please consider supporting the channel by following the links in the description below.
And if you want to see us getting rules wrong all the time, you can check out our actual play in the Worlds of Drakkenheim. It airs Tuesday evenings on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we got plenty more videos all about TTRPGs and how to handle difficult issues at the table for GMs right up over here.
Please subscribe to this channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time
in the dungeon.